of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Just noting that Councillor Joanne Fotakis is on an apology for tonight due to personal reasons, and Councillor Susan Gondaszewski will be joining us but is just running a little bit late. So welcome everybody to our council briefing. This is our meeting where we take questions and ask questions and seek answers from our administration in relation to the reports before us this evening. But it's also an opportunity for you to speak during public question time. We welcome you here. There's no set order, it's just whoever wishes to approach the microphone first. We just ask that you please state your name, the suburb in which you reside and the item which you are speaking to. And we do provide 3 minutes per question or statement. And just also to let you know that we do stream public question time. So if anybody has a problem or concern about that, please do flag that with me. So I open public question time to you. Hello, Ros.
Hello, everyone. It's a bit nerve-wracking to be on this side of things, so I'll try and stick with the 3 minutes. I also wish to acknowledge the land on which we're on as being Whadjuk land and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. And I stand here as an Aboriginal woman who also wishes to acknowledge my elders in my own country, which is Gureen country, which you'll know as Katanning, Naranggarup, Jerramungup, and right down to the Beaufort Inlet. Despite feeling very passionately for different reasons on 2 of your agenda items, I'm going to speak to agenda item 7.5, which is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. First of all, I want to acknowledge the work of the RAP group, the working group of which I'm on, and I want to acknowledge the work that goes back much further in time to 2017, back on the 4th of April, when this council, of which I was then a member, adopted our Innovate RAP, something I'm incredibly proud of. As a progressive council, we took our community along for that conversation, and we still are, and we are still pushing the envelope. I'm a bit sad to hear that I think Bayswater and Fremantle may have beaten us to the punch on this one, but that's okay. We're in the top 3, and that's okay. So when Council endorsed this back in April 2017, we set down a pathway of acknowledging the Uluru Statement from the Heart as one of our deliverables. And a lot of activity has happened since that time. So what the Uluru Statement from the Heart seeks to do is to bring about constitutional change and to bring about legislative change. Part of that legislative change is to set up a Makarata Commission. It's not a dance, it's a real thing, and it's a Yolngu word, and it means many, many, many things, but one of the things it means is resolution, discussion, negotiation to bring about outcomes. And that process will go on a pathway of getting agreement but with Australian governments. And one of the things often asked about issues like this of local government is, what are you getting involved for? This is not a local government matter. But of course, I strongly disagree with that statement, and I hope many others in the room do as well. Aboriginal issues and Indigenous issues are always local government issues. We play a critical role in preserving culture, in raising awareness about Aboriginal issues in our own cities. We have custody and care of the songlines, many of which run through the City of Vincent, which are critical to the story of local Aboriginal people. And we can really move the public debate in a range of ways, including procurement, local jobs, and getting local people involved in these issues. So I really want to commend this to the council, and really proud that I'm a community member of a council that goes down this pathway, and I'm really proud to continue to be a community member on the RAP working group. I know my time's up, but I am going to leave some newspapers here, which I'll give to the Mayor. I'm hoping you have seen these newspapers. If you haven't, I'll leave you copies. This is a newspaper on which I'm now the general manager. It's an incredible
Thank you very much, Ros. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors. Thank you for your response, incidentally. I know this is a briefing session in answering my questions last month about the lack of parking for businesses and on the east side of Oxford Street. I was a little disappointed, I have to say, in Council's response in saying that there is no problem for on-street parking on the east side of Oxford Street, that is Newcastle Street and Carr Place. I'm telling you that there is a problem. You need only speak to the business operators in that area to find that out. Nevertheless, that aside, I'm very pleased to come along tonight and hear the discussion on parklets. And let me say from the outset that I'm in favour of parklets. I think that they add to the environment and a bit of a vibe, etc. However, there is nothing in this report that I've sort of read, and I ask that you consider this, that acknowledges that every parklet that you put down on the street, you take up a parking bay for businesses. And in the main, I'm talking about 9 to 5 businesses who are seriously disadvantaged. And all you're going to do, if you don't put in public parking, multi-storey parking bay or whatever, preferably on Frame Court, then you're going to kill the very diversity that makes Leederville Precinct such an appealing place to go to. I urge you to go and speak to businesses on the east side of Oxford Street, the tattoo parlours, the coffee shops, the real estate agencies, the employment sort of agencies, the mining service operators that operate from this area, and ask them what they think, whether or not the assessment by council is the correct one, that there is no parking problem on the east side of Oxford Street. There is, and I ask that you acknowledge that by finding some amenable sort of solution to the parklet situation, which everyone welcomes, but we'd like to see some compensation somewhere along the way, and a multi-storey car park on Frame Court is the logical answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Julian Vinchulo, Mount Hawthorn. I actually reside on the corner of Oxford Street and Scarver Beach Road. That particular building on that corner has an undercover private car park on the ground floor, which is for tenants who reside at the building, for clients and visitors to the building of the Bodhi Tree Cafe, the Revived Day Spa, a chiropractic clinic. On the first floor, Clinipath, Oxford Dermatology and Oxford Day Surgery. There are 4 residential apartments on the second floor. There has been, since its construction some 10 years ago, an increase in the problems associated with those who visit, attend the businesses in the vicinity using the private car park. We were able to, until a few years ago, manage that by having wheel clamping. That has been taken away. The businesses and the tenants of that building are now somewhat troubled by the fact that we don't have enough parking because those visiting hairdressers, Pilates studios, architecture offices, coffee shops, bureaus, and that's why I'm here speaking in relation to 5.2, the proposed development of 404 to 406. In the report, it stated that there was quite some vacancy rate to parking in the area. I find that very difficult to believe. Just today, there was no parking during the hours of 9 to 5 on Oxford Street and in the public car park just off Oxford Street on the east side. I can't see how taking up 2 more parking bays for a parklet is going to improve the situation for the businesses and the tenants in the city of Vincent. I think this needs some serious reconsideration. Unless the council can come forward with some way of assisting me as one of the owners of the building that I reside in, assist me with controlling the illegal or perhaps unlawful parking within the building, then I think we're going to have a greater problem. We currently have a problem with even the pet shop customers using our building. Why? It's undercover. It's convenient. I think you really seriously need to reconsider that.
Thank you very much, Julian. Appreciate your feedbacks and comments. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Martin. I speak on 2 fronts here. I am a resident in Mount Hawthorn on Oxford Street, and I also conduct a business on Oxford Street. One of the main concerns I have is, once again, the lack of parking, and the parking study that's quoted, I believe, is somewhat flawed. 3 of the days were Saturday and Sundays. Now, if you go through Oxford Street at peak times on a morning, lunchtime, parking is very scarce. From my personal experience, I have patients running late for appointments, particularly on a Saturday, because they cannot find parking. We actually allow a buffer of 15 minutes to help accommodate that particular problem. The loss of 2 parking bays may not seem a lot by number, but it's the precedent that possibly is going to be established. And I know this is not on the item for discussion at all, but the Axford Park upgrade, which is scheduled for whenever, has the removal of 26 car parking bays that are used every day. So, councillors, what are you going to do to combat that? The precinct is mixed use. It is not just hospitality, cafes and restaurants. We have consultation, we have medical centres, we have retail, and the loss of parking will impact the 9 to 5 trade of these businesses. The cafe or the applicant in question, a lot of their business is conducted after hours, and parking is not a problem during those hours. I will admit that. But during 9 to 5 trading, if we are going to compromise the efficient and successful running of businesses, it's going to cause a problem. We're going to have Beaufort Street. We're going to have Subiaco all over again if we squeeze out small business operators. From a residential perspective, and I'm just going to treetop this, one of the concerns that I have is the noise on Oxford Street, both before trading and after trading. It is a very real problem. I have personally been down there at 5 a.m. and asked them to be very quiet, setting up 2 hours before their scheduled opening, and after hours past 12 a.m. That's another issue. But, you know, I would encourage you to think carefully with your decision. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. You're always welcome back next week, or you're also welcome to send through comments via email. Next speaker, please.
Ross Marinich is my name. I run a business at 400 Oxford Street in Mount Hawthorn. I endorse what Wayne has said. Parking's been a big problem. I've been in this street since 1982. It has got to that stage. My wife and I are about to make the decision, because of what council's done with the trees down the side and taking out bays, the Axford Park changeover, and if these parklets go ahead, we will be forced, when our lease is finished, to quit and move out of the area. That would be a very sad moment for us, because we've been here for such a long time. All I just ask, please reconsider, look at the depth of it. If you do allow we'll use Baraz, and I have nothing against Julio, but what is stopping Yellow from applying? What is stopping the Bodhi tree from applying? What is stopping whoever goes into 399 Oxford Street applying? Then we had the architect that was doing coffee. What would have to stop him from abiding? We could end up with no parking bays between Anzac Road and Scarborough Beach Road. And I think that would be very detrimental to a council that is trying to do the right thing. Remember, we are all ratepayers in this. Why is some being favoured more than others? I just please ask you to rethink and have more consultation and go and actually speak to people that are really involved in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ. And just to remind everyone in the public gallery that we have a recommendation from the officers to council. So council hasn't expressed a view on this particular application. Next speaker, please. No one further? Okay, thank you very much everyone for your comments. Oh yes, we do have someone at the back. So were you seeking a deputation?
No.
No? Okay, go ahead.
So I'm actually the architect that did the design for the Biraz Alfresco area. Now the city's vision is to have.
Would you mind just stating your name and the suburb in which you reside, just for our records, please?
My name is David, and I don't reside in the city of Vincent.
Okay, can you please give us your full name for the records, or is that causing you a privacy problem?
That's
okay.
fine. So my last name is Kirov. Now the city's Vincent vision for the future is to have a sustainable and thriving community that sees the activation of public spaces. However, activation does not mean the erection of a structure. Activation is the public wanting to use the spaces provided. Now, a structure that does not provide protection to the elements is a space that will not be used. We agree that cafe blinds should be prohibited to all outdoor dining areas as they are outdated and not aesthetically pleasing to the streetscapes. However, to avoid any unfairness, this new licensing condition should be passed down to all past and present Alfresco licensees and not just for new applicants. Now, that still leaves the question on how to create an environment for the public to feel safe to use. Our solution was to install half-height fixed glazing that have the ability to slide shut in the event of severe winds and horizontal rain. These glass panels have no transom bars, and the glazing would be clear and not age and discolour over time like cafe blinds. They will also prevent noise and dust contaminants from entering into the public area and vice versa, which will add to a much more inviting experience. And these operational parameters can be part of the licensing agreement. With regards to privatisation, in our opinion, the current street dynamics boasts of privatisation, where each business confines themselves within the built envelope. What we are striving for is an outcome that brings the inside out and allows for public to walk through and drive past the businesses, allowing for public engagement at all times of the day and, most importantly, all times of the year, as the glazing will not provide any visual barriers that can be seen from images presented. In closing, should the glazing not be approved or the structure not be approved, we feel that the city's long-term vision of activated outdoor dining areas will ultimately fall short, as it does not support small businesses. It is a big ask to expect a small business to pay a large sum of money to erect a structure that can effectively only be used half of the year, which is no different to dining out on the street pavement. It is an expensive exercise for little gain and will deter future developments of the like, ultimately seeing the continuation of businesses remaining contained within their built walls, which in essence is the definition of privatisation. Thank you.
Before you go, David, can I just ask, are you saying that if the glazing condition is upheld, that the applicant won't go ahead with the structure?
No.
Okay, just clarifying that.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
What we're seeking for is, because there's a new policy coming in that cafe blinds are not permitted, which we're more than happy to agree to, provided that policy is instated to everybody. So past and present licensees.
I don't know if we can do that. It's once something's approved, it's approved in planning.
Yep.
But thank you for your comments.
No problems, thank you.
We also have some questions that have come in writing, so I'll just go to our Manager of Governance for those questions.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the first question is from Dudley Meyer of Highgate in respect to item 5.2. So that's 404 to 406 Oxford Street. Condition 1.5 states that the area is not for exclusive use. One of the suggestions made when the city recently advertised the development on city-owned land policy was that if the city was serious in its intention that space should not be privatised, there should be a requirement to have a sign similar to those required for parklets, making it clear that the area is not for the exclusive use of a particular business. How will the local community know that the licensed area is not for exclusive use of the businesses and that anybody is entitled to use the facility? Can you confirm that members of the community will be able to use any seating in the area without using any services of the adjacent businesses? Why does condition 1.2 just refer to the verge when the licensed area actually extends 2.3 metres beyond the verge into the road? Did the city obtain a market valuation for the 54 square metre area prior to advertising the proposal? If so, what was the valuation? Who provided the valuation and when was it provided? If a valuation was obtained, was it less than the $5,000 stipulated in Regulation 32A as a requirement for being an exempt disposition? Does Regulation 32A actually apply in this case, given that it is not a transfer of the ownership? Determination Advice Note 7 makes it clear that the movement of all path users must not be impeded in any way during the course of the building works, but does not make any reference to the period after construction. Why isn't there an advice note to make it clear that pedestrian movement must not be impeded once construction has been completed? Why is the city entertaining this request in the affirmative before finalising the development on a city-owned land policy? Dudley Marr also submitted some questions in respect to the parklet policy, which is item 5.8. Will the non-exclusive nature of the parklet policy still apply if an adjacent property obtains a liquor licence for the parklet area? How will the business owner be responsible for patron numbers if the area may be used in a non-exclusive manner? For example, a member of the public uses the parklet without being a patron of the business. Will the limit on patron numbers be able to be used by a business owner as an excuse to exclude people taking advantage of the non-exclusive nature of the parklet? Next questions are from Andrew Main of North Perth in respect to item 6.6 and 6.3. Question 1, on page 29 of the city's accessible city strategy, the following statements are found. Future transport hierarchy of use must preference mobility for people, not cars, through greatly improved pedestrian, cycle and public transport infrastructure. On Vincent's roads, existing priority is typically for people who choose to drive. In upgrading and or making changes to these roads, pedestrian infrastructure will be the first focus. This may generate the need for more safe crossing points. One of the standard outcomes of roundabouts is to allow for continuous movement of vehicles, and vehicle drivers are not required to give way to pedestrians crossing any of the intersecting roads. Given the project area has a high level of pedestrian activity comprising people of all ages and abilities, how does the provision of roundabouts comply with the recommendation in the accessible city strategy to put the needs of pedestrians first? Question 2, has the impact on pedestrian safety and comfort been assessed by the city administration? And if not, why not? If it has, why hasn't this assessment been included in the officer's report so that council can make a fully informed decision? Question 3, does the Department of Transport support the provision of roundabouts on roads in this area that are planned to be developed into safe, active streets? Question 4, if the city proceeds with this proposal, will it incorporate zebra crossings across all roads leading into the roundabout? Examples of roundabouts with zebra crossings exist in the city of Fremantle. Questions in respect to item 6.3, the North Perth Traffic Report are, with regard to the recent works at the intersection of Chelmsford and Fitzgerald Street, North Perth, I put forward a view to the city administration that some elected members that a more effective approach would have been to place a median barrier on Fitzgerald Street to prevent drivers from turning right into Chelmsford Road. I was advised by the city administration that this approach would not have been fair on residents on adjacent streets because drivers would use their street instead. Question 1, given the above, why is it acceptable for the city to place a median barrier on Fitzgerald Street to prevent drivers turning into View Street, given that drivers will use adjacent streets as an alternative? Question 2, from the agenda report, it appears that data collection for vehicle movements was obtained from one field visit in the morning and another in the afternoon. Does collecting data at these times on only one occasion provide adequate information on the impact of the median barrier on traffic movements and adjacent streets? If not, does council have comprehensive data to make an informed decision on this matter? Question 3, will the city collect traffic data for the whole of the day to ensure that it has comprehensive understanding about the impact of placing a median barrier on Fitzgerald Street? Question 4, On page 407 of the council agenda, the following statement is made. Elmer Road is not a direct route to Charles Street, as is Angove and View Streets. How can this statement be justified given that there is no barrier preventing a driver
Manager,
from
I'm
travelling?
having to call time now, otherwise I think this will go on
Okay.
for a very long time, but thank
That
you.
is the last question.
That's the last
thank
question?
you,
Okay,
actually.
thank you.
But I do have one more from Mary Slythe
Okay.
of West Perth, item 6.5. A question and a statement. What action can be taken by council to prevent cyclists speeding on Strathcona Street, Bicycle Boulevard? The speed limit is 30 kilometres for motor vehicles, but cyclists can often be guilty of racing along roads between cars when there is no bicycle path. How will this be managed? What action is council going to take to ensure that local resident ratepayers still have right to get to Colvin Lane and into Strathcona Streets so that they can successfully negotiate their way to a main road? For example, Charles Street, Vincent Street, Newcastle Street. As it looks from the Safe Active Streets proposal, it is going to be very difficult to get in and out of Strathcona Street into either Car or Newcastle Streets, having to watch out for fast cyclists as well as turn around the widened curks at the corners of each of the curbs at the corners of each of these streets, especially at peak hour. What is the council going to do about this? Is council aware that to see what oncoming traffic from Car Street is turning into Strathcona Street from when they have just turned into Strathcona Street from Newcastle Street and there are several cars? Will they have to go back into Newcastle Street? I have no vacant spaces in Strathcona Street, so it's hard to let cars pass. Have all councillors and Vincent staff come and checked out the actual layout of this section of Cleaver Precinct to see what impact this proposal will have on the particular community? Looking at drawings on papers can be a big trap for all involved. Do you agree? What action is council taking to what action is council going to take when reviewing how many vehicles will wish to use Cleaver Street to get to their destinations, heading west or southwest? I have lived in Cleaver Precinct for over 60 years, Strathcona Street and now Car Street, and I'd say I know this area better than most. I've ridden my bike, driven my car, walked and ridden scooter bikes through these streets and have been on main roads as a volunteer committee member for the Charles Street off-ramp. So I believe council should take note of my knowledge and suggestions for handling the safety of its residents. What actions will be taken if a speeding cyclist hits a car, is hit as cars come out of Colvin Lane and find it very hard to see them through extra trees to be planted or it is raining heavily? Where does the safety for local people come in? How safe will pedestrians walking on footpaths in Strathcona Street and Car Street be when cyclists decide to ride on the footpaths instead of the road to dodge cars? What action is council going to take to let resident ratepayers still park in the street outside their own homes or close to them? And what about workers who have to do repairs? In cases of carrying out heavy, large repairs to a home, they must be given space to park. How can this be arranged? This is already difficult when customers of West End Alley park outside our homes and take up large chunks of parking in our street. Has Perth Bus Transport been notified of this proposal, especially when cyclists could be hit crossing Newcastle Street from the foot of Strathcona Street to Golding Street?
Sorry, is this nearly finished?
That is the last sentence. She notes that a bus driver who was recently charged for hitting a cyclist in Northbridge.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, just before we close public question time, I'll just see if there was any further questions. We have had a request for a 5-minute deputation. So if there are no further public questions, then I will call that person forward. That is Lex Barnett, and speaking in relation to item 6.5, Safe Active Street. Thank you, Lex. We will time you to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. So Lex Barnett, I'm from Taylor Burrell Barnett, and I'm speaking on behalf of the WA Flour Mills Proprietary Limited and Ladrift Proprietary Limited, who own all of the land on the western side of Golding Street. And it's a land area that takes up approximately 1/3 of that entire street block between Golding and Cleaver Street. Firstly, I did want to say that we do support the city's overall Safe Active Streets strategy. The intent and vision behind it is admirable and indeed worthwhile. But planning the cycle route through this commercial industrial precinct between Old Aberdeen and Newcastle Street is going to be very problematic, particularly in the short to medium term. And certainly seeking to run the route through Golding Street is going to end up with an undesirable solution, both for the cyclists and also for the adjacent properties. Golding Street is essentially a commercial access street for the many adjoining properties. The businesses located on our clients' land include mining and geological materials, storage and sorting, car auction and car wash, audio equipment studio, lighting equipment shop and warehouse, artworks and framing gallery, photography studio and warehouse, and other general warehousing. And on other properties also fronting the street, there is other warehousing and transport depots and events, venue, offices and so on. Now, I understand that the street does carry a considerable amount of traffic, not just moving up and down the street, but turning in and out of the street from those adjoining properties. It's also a narrow street, so manoeuvring is already quite constrained. So in planning to transform this street into a safe, active streets route with all of the additional calming and other measures, etc., to make it more safe and appealing to the cyclists, it would seem to me that the city hasn't really considered the consequences on the owners and the types of businesses that rely on that street for frontage and access. The owners are concerned that encouraging cyclist movement through here is going to lead to conflict with all of the cross movements of trucks and cars from the adjoining properties. Now, that is in large part a concern about the safety of the cyclists, first and foremost, but it's also about the security of those businesses that do rely on that street. Put simply, if and when incidents do occur, the owners are concerned that there will undoubtedly be calls to further limit and constrain the commercial traffic movement. And thereby that's going to impact on their ability to conduct their lawful business in line with the zoning of the land. We do, on the other side, we do acknowledge and appreciate that the city officers have offered to continue to consult with our clients, with the owners, to make further minor adjustments to the design of the street, to try to ensure acceptable access arrangements. But really it's the concern, the primary concern is with planning to channel potentially high volumes of cycle movement through a small but busy commercial access street. So minor design really isn't going to sort of resolve that overarching issue. Planning for a safe, active street route through this precinct is never going to be easy, but it is important that we pay due regard to the unintended consequences of any solution that is proposed. While Golding Street might on face value be considered to be a preferable route to Cleaver Street, it is still highly problematic and it is potentially going to promote a dangerous conflict of movements, which we feel hasn't been properly recognised. So I would urge the elected members to give serious consideration to this and to move and vote to return the matter for further analysis of the potential risks and impacts for future cyclists and for the businesses that rely on the unencumbered use of that street. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Lex. Appreciate your comments. And we will ask some questions about that when we come to this item. Okay, so that concludes public question time and deputation. So I'll go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there are 3 declarations of interest from Councillor Smith. The first in relation to item 12.3, noting that Councillor Smith's husband is a member of the Audit Committee. The second disclosure affecting impartiality in relation to item 9.2 notes that Egidio was a sponsor of the Mount Hawthorn Streets and Lane Festival at Councillor Smith's previous place of employment. And the third is proximity of financial interest in relation to item 6.4 on the Leederville Laneway upgrade, noting that Councillor Smith works for Dale Olcott Homes, which is an ABN Group company, and will be working from the ABN building when it's completed next year. Councillor Smith is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in the chambers or vote on the matter. There's a declaration of interest affecting proximity from Councillor Toppelberg in relation to item 6.6, noting that the councillor's primary residence is located within the proposed trial area. That's all, Mayor Cole.
Thank you very much. So what we do in terms of going through the agenda is that we go to the matters that were first raised by members in the public gallery so that you can be present if you wish to hear the questions and answers. So the first item that was raised tonight was item 7.5, which is support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Council members, any questions? Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. This was discussed at the RAP working group meeting, so I was just hoping the director could give an update on what the RAP working group's feedback was at that meeting last week.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, this was discussed by the RAP working group last week. I have to say that there was a really passionately positive response to the fact that Council was proposing this recommendation. And I suppose as someone who was fairly new to the RAP working group, I was quite taken aback by the degree of passion and emotion in the room. So I was certainly struck by the importance of this issue to our First Nations people who reside in Vincent. So I would say there was overwhelming support from the RAP working group.
Councillors? Could I just ask a question? I have to admit to being a little bit surprised that this came up because I thought that we had already endorsed our position in relation to the Uluru Statement when we adopted our Innovate RAP. I'm, wholeheartedly in support, but when I go back to the Innovate RAP, it says here that we will investigate opportunities for the City and Council to support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So I have taken that as support when we adopted the Innovate RAP. So I just wanted to seek clarification on whether that's been a misunderstanding that I've made or that we have somehow lost it in translation, because I'm just questioning whether this is actually a restatement of our intent with some follow-up actions, because I had believed that we had made that clear.
Yeah, Mayor Cole, my understanding, I wasn't involved in the development of the Innovate RAP, but I think the statement was investigated as opposed to an affirmative statement of support. So given that we're now at the stage where we are looking to formally close out actions that were in the Innovate RAP, we felt that hadn't been fully closed out, and for the benefit of clarity, that it was worthy of a formal recommendation, and that would be very clearly a statement of intent.
I just do query whether if I was to put up an amendment to say that we reaffirm our support, whether that would ring true for Council, because that's my understanding. I do feel that the Uluru Statement of the Heart has been something that we have endorsed, and if we're saying this, that we're adopting this now, 3 years down the track, I just want to check that, because I think that it would be better to reaffirm, and that we just need to test the belief that I have held these 3 years and whether that is actually deeply held amongst Council members. Well, I mean, if we've made that commitment 3 years ago, I want to state that that was the case, because otherwise a lot of time has passed. I'm happy for us to consider how we do that, but I haven't had chance to go back to our adoption of the Innovate RAP, but perhaps if you could provide at the time what the recommendation that was adopted by council when we adopted the Innovate RAP.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I certainly feel that there has been a strong sentiment that has come through all the way along. So I understand exactly what you're saying. Very happy to go back and really clarify what we had recommended and what the resolution was initially. And we can make sure that that's clear in the proposal.
And also just a query about writing to state Premier and State Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, given it's a constitutional issue. I think we should focus attention on our federal counterparts. So I would like to either flag an amendment, or if administration believes this to be reasonable, that we actually write to the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs federally and some of our federal representatives in Western Australia, because this is a constitutional issue. And I believe if we write to our state counterparts, they will say, well, this is a constitutional federal issue.
My thought on, in terms of the recommendation, Mayor Cole, the reason that it was worded in that way was twofold. So I think the first was that, yes, it's constitutional matters, so there is definitely a federal discussion to be had. And then the second is our role in advocacy and representing the views of the City of Vincent to our counterparts within Western Australia, and I suppose to demonstrate our support and encouragement for other local governments to do the same.
I do appreciate that, but I also think that when you write letters, you do need to write to the decision makers, and I think that we really need to lobby at the federal level, and we need to spend a lot of effort into engaging with our community, because ultimately that's where the engagement and the power lies in moving this forward. So, but I take your response and I will consider a potential amendment. Are there any other questions on the recommendation?
Just wondering if the nil against public health implications is correct. If we'll go back to the public health plan and think about a few of the items, there might be some relevance.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's actually a very good observation, and I'll take that on notice, because I think there would be some public health issues as I reflect on your question. So thank you for that.
Can I also add closing the gap statistics, because if representation is linked to good health outcomes, which I believe it is, that would also be a consideration in the public health area. Any further questions? Okay, thank you everyone. Moving to the next item raised by members of the public gallery, which was item 5.8, amendment to policy number 2.2.13, parklets. Any questions? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just reading the, okay, so on page 273, which is page 6 of the policy, in item 5 under community consultation, it says that letters sent to businesses and residents affected. Is there more detail in the policy around this and how we actually determine the who, what and where?
Through you, Mayor Cole, letters are sent to the businesses and residents affected. That's kind of the line that it says in the policy, but it does provide the specific time frame of that. It also needs to be advertised online for a period of 14 days. And there also needs to be a notice in the window of the business that will potentially host that parklet for that 14 days as well. And then the officer recommendation is only determined by a level of agreement perceived through those 3 means.
So who are the businesses and residents affected?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there needs to be approval from the adjacent businesses specifically, and then consultation overall with the surrounding businesses more generally, but the business next door needs to be in approval of that parklet.
Excuse me, members of the public gallery, please. We do appreciate you're passionate about these issues, but it's best not to comment. Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Councillor Hallett.
Just a few, so bear with me. One is about in relation to the consultation as well. There's a few other times we've had consultation maps provided that showed the locations of objections versus support. I'm wondering if we could get that in terms of getting a sense of the adjacent properties and their support or objection to the proposal.
Through you, Mayor Cole, as this parklets policy was not, the amendment was not based on one specific location of one specific parklet. It's actually to do with all current and future parklets in the city. It wouldn't be locationally based on one parklet, but parklets in general for the city.
I think you might, yep, that's okay. We'll come back to you. It's a good question to ask a little bit later. Any other questions on the change to the parklet policy, which is dealing with the ability to licence parklets? Councillor, save it for next week. I just wanted to ask a question about whether the policy needs to reflect the use of temporary parklets, or is that simply something that is in the rebound policy as a temporary measure?
Through you, Mayor Cole, all parklets are seen as temporary and it is stated in the rebound plan. I'm just looking for it in the policy as well.
Okay, well, if you find the wording there, feel free to take it on notice and I'll have a closer look as well. Any further questions on the parklet policy? Okay, thank you, everyone. The next item raised is item 5.2, development application and licence to locate a permanent alfresco structure in the Oxford Street Road Reserve adjacent to numbers 404 to 406 Oxford Street, Mount Hoffon. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone. Not to repeat all of that, is it possible to get a map of where the objections came from?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that can be arranged through the briefing notes. Ordinarily, when we undertake consultation through the planning framework, it's around the nature of the comments received, and that's the intent of the commentary in the report. But we can provide you a little bit more detail about the locations of the submitters in the briefing notes.
In the report, there's some commentary around the original approval from the applicant in terms of patron numbers in the internal spaces. Just wondering what implication this would have on that and whether something separate would need to be approved to increase numbers, or they're just planning to spread patrons around more.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the latter. Ultimately, the premises is still capped by the maximum number of patrons, which is 83 between the two tenancies. So that could be spread out between the internal space as well as, if this is to be approved, the alfresco area.
Councillor Hallett, that's all. Okay, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'm just trying to corral my questions into to one, wrap it up in a bow, I suppose. My first questions are around noise. So do we have any indication from the applicant as to how they're planning to manage noise issues in this area? Do they rely on the use of the half glass / closed glass panels?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the glass component of the development was not premised on noise attenuation or some sort of noise mitigation measure. It was more around the function, as you heard tonight, around being able to use that space all year round. In terms of noise, it wasn't particularly, and as you can see in the supporting information from the applicant, it's not thoroughly fleshed out in that justification. There is a section in the officer report that deals with noise management. And in short, bless you, in short, the outdoor eating areas, we wouldn't ordinarily require a noise or acoustic report to be prepared for any Alfresco permits that we issue. But in saying that, noise relates to amenity impacts potentially. We're considering a permanent structure. So on that basis, there is consideration from the planning framework around the appropriateness of measures in place. And there's a few limitations or restrictions that's been recommended by administration around no amplified music, some management around the patron numbers, ensuring that that is captured, as well as the times of set up and pack down. You heard some concerns this evening about the noise stemming from that. So those are all intended to be captured as part of a noise management plan.
And on that note, in relation to the noise and the hours it's taking place, have we had any complaints lodged, or what would be the process for ensuring compliance with the current approvals?
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps I'll take that on notice in terms of the history of any complaints received. I'd like to check that. In terms of the process, ultimately, administration would investigate the nature of those concerns, liaise with the operator, but ultimately they are compelled to comply with the noise regulations. And again, there can be some noise monitoring equipment to provide some evidence and to demonstrate whether they are operating in compliance or not with those noise regulation emission levels.
And with the current approval as it stands, is there a requirement for set up and pack down to happen within a close period to the trading hours, or does that have to happen within the trading hours? What's the normal restrictions on those?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I will confirm in the briefing notes, but I don't believe there is any terms of the current approval around set up and pack down. And I assume that's because the Alfresco, or should I say the outdoor eating component of the existing use is really quite informal. There's a few tables and chairs and such. So I guess from that avenue, ordinarily, it's just dealt with as part of that outdoor eating permit process.
Thank you. The next question I have is around exclusive use. So the recommendation specifically, let me just check, states that it's non-exclusive use. And I think we've had this discussion before in relation to Alfresco permanent structures. How does that work together with a liquor licence that might require exclusive use? I appreciate that we're not the liquor licensing authority, but your understanding of the requirements from the liquor licence, would that require exclusive use?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we would need to confirm, first of all, the liquor licence type and perhaps some of those restrictions around that and some of those requirements from the department in issuing those. Notwithstanding that, there is a term in the licence that has been recommended around non-exclusive use. Now, ultimately, that's just to ensure that there is free movement for pedestrians through that space. There is still a publicly accessible footpath between this proposed structure and the premises itself, so that needs to be available. And I guess that non-exclusive use component would also extend to being available for people to, or non-patrons being able to access that space at any given time, even during business hours. Now that's, I guess, the premise of a non-exclusive use. That's not to say that the applicant would be supportive of that approach, because I suspect that they would want this structure to accommodate their own patrons.
Thank you. And there was a question through by email that related to that as to whether members of the public could use the area and potentially the furniture in that non-exclusive area during trading hours. I imagine that's not satisfactory to the applicant, but is that the intention when we talk about non-exclusive use?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's a great question. I just refer back to other similar structures, and it hasn't been explicit in that way. Perhaps in practice, there's a understanding maybe from community members that that space is really used by patrons. So it hasn't been brought to my attention in terms of the effectiveness of that, but I suspect that's how it's played out in the past. Now, if we were to seek some sort of clearer obligation by the use of signs, which is what has been suggested in that email correspondence, then that would be slightly different than other approaches, because I haven't seen that done in the past. But that is available to council if they wish to incorporate something like that as a licensed term.
Thank you. And just finally, there's been a number of questions and concerns raised around parking and car bays. There seems to be some discrepancy in the understanding in the report and from members of the public as to how many car bays were lost recently when the bike paths were upgraded in that area. And I'm happy for this to be taken on notice, but can we have a confirmation of how many car bays have been lost in recent times?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe there's a inline response in the schedule of submissions, being administration's response to that particular query. I believe it's in the order of 4 bays in total. Again, I can provide a little bit more detail around that in terms of what else was involved, perhaps reconfiguration of some parking and some landscaping and such, so I can confirm that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. And just finally, just interested in some commentary from the comments we had from several public members around the lack of parking in the area, and that our GIS mapping doesn't seem to support that, but just wondering where that discrepancy is coming from.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, car parking and availability of on-street car parking is a relevant planning consideration as part of this. In terms of what you've heard tonight from some speakers, they are referring to peak usage, and particularly around during daytime trade. So that is their experience. I guess the data that has been included in the officer's report really relates to mapping available to the officers, and that is on average on those days. So in that way, I can understand why there are still concerns from the local business owners around peak usage, because we have not referred to peak usage in the report. I just wanted to clarify that. That is an on average analysis, and that's the information that is available to administration.
Thank you. And sorry, I know I said finally, but I have one more. When the approval was originally granted, there was calculation on on-site bays and cash in lieu. If this recommendation is approved, there's a further 2 bays that are lost. How does that, or can that calculation be readjusted, given that we have a new approval or a new area that's the calculation has changed with car bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the loss of 2 on-street bays, you need to establish the nexus, and I suppose those on-street bays are not for the exclusive use of this premises. So on that basis, if you're suggesting, is there an ability to contribute some sort of cash in lieu payment, or is that a relevant consideration? My advice is that would not be reasonable. If councillor of the mind to support the removal of these 2 on-street bays, it is really in the context of it being non-exclusive and it being available for the broader public and this town centre area. And we would just need to accept that we are losing 2 on-street bays. Very different than a shortfall of parking on private property for the exclusive use of that premises.
Okay, although they become exclusive by taking them away. But I guess the question is, if this approval was coming before us from the very beginning, including this Alfresco structure that was proposing to take 2 car bays, would that cash in lieu calculation be any different? Maybe what you're saying is no, but I guess it's something that I would like to consider before next week.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can provide you a little bit more advice and greater clarity. Thanks.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Smith.
Okay, please just bear with me because I've got notes all over the place. Okay, can I start with the community consultation, please? This is a very unique and significant proposal for Oxford Street North for residents and businesses. So can administration just explain the decision to only consult the businesses next door when this is clearly not a parklet? So I'm presuming that the parklet policy was used for the determination of who was going to be consulted. Would that be correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, not the parklet policy to guide the advertising is in fact our community consultation policy that guides development applications more generally, given that it is purely based on the works, the built form outcome. It is set out in our consultation policy that ordinarily you would advertise to the immediate adjoining properties, and that is what the initial consultation period looks like. We did receive feedback from adjoining business owners and reflected and responded and increased that advertising, recognising that it is in the public realm. It is not really directly impacting those adjoining businesses only. It's a broader town centre consideration. So we did extend that subsequent to receiving that feedback. We extended the consultation period.
And do you feel that the extended period of time was long enough and you gave them long enough to respond?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I believe that there was adequate consultation undertaken. It was extended till the 29th of November, commenced from the 6th of November. There was some overlap in terms of people that initially received some letters and then additional business owners and occupiers that receive letters subsequently. In noting that we were cognizant of, I guess, procedural fairness for the applicant, because from the applicant's perspective, there's a consultation policy adopted by council that says for these structures you would only advertise to the adjoining properties. So I guess given that it is a little bit of a different scenario, I guess we made a value judgment and we thought that on balance this was a reasonable amount of consultation and the approach to take.
Excuse me to jump in, but how do we have a consultation policy that envisages what sort of consultation we would run for something that the council's never considered before?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's based on, as I said, the nature of the works. So it doesn't contemplate removal of bays. It's not as explicit as that in the consultation policy. The consultation policy really states that based on the nature of the works, you would undertake consultation to the adjoining properties. And that was the basis for administration's initial advertising.
Sorry, Councillor Smith, back to your questions.
Thank you. Okay, regarding the draft development on city-owned and managed land, that's now closed. That consultation is now closed, hasn't it? Yeah. In the scope of the definitions, sorry, I just need to bring it up. It doesn't actually talk about road. It says road reserve being the verge, curb and footpath areas adjacent to roads which the city has care, control and management. It doesn't actually say road. So I'm wondering how you know, that is this an area, is this a grey area that we haven't really grasped?
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps that's the case. The policy was advertised in draft form, and it's not certain or imminent to come into effect in the way it was advertised. So I guess that's the purpose of the advertising process. We learn and we improve, and if we identify gaps, then we'll address those. So if there's an opportunity to clarify, then I guess that's the opportunity.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Sorry, Councillor Smith, can I just add to that? So that's the reason, because we've got so many community comments on that draft development on city-owned and managed land policy. We haven't brought it back to council yet because we are considering and proposing some more amendments which could result in further consultation. So we'd bring that back to council hopefully in early 2021. But we are looking at things like we hadn't really contemplated before development being within the actual carriageway. So we were thinking the verge. But that's something that's come to us before and we have to consider and get council's view on that as well.
Councillor Smith, while we're on this, could you just mind me asking, this is my fundamental question, why would we consider this application before determining a draft policy on the use of city-owned property and in car bays which has not been discussed or entertained within that draft policy for community comment?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So I think there's a right for the applicant to put this application to the city. So there's proposed structure and for us to consider it and consider it in line with other policies, not just this draft one. We haven't really, we've just considered the principles in the policy which council has approved and we've advertised. So there's, so we're putting it to council, but we're not relying on the policy because it is draft. So I think there is a right for council to consider it and council could make a decision on it. Even though the policy is draft, because we're not saying it complies with the policy. That's just something we've given consideration to.
In the report, it actually states that the proposed development would be consistent with the objectives of the draft policy. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole. In my view, yes, the broad objectives that council considered last time that draft policy went to council.
Thank you. What would be I'm just throwing it out there, what would be the applicant's appetite to have this, do we call it referred? What do we say? Deferred. And for us to continue or to us to complete a further consultation amending the draft development policy, what would be the appetite to have a parklet in the meantime?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can liaise with the applicant subsequent to briefing tonight and seek their feedback and provide that in the briefing notes to yourself. What we have before us is a development application as well as a licence, but from a development application perspective, there's a number of things that you're required to do, which is approve unconditionally, approve with conditions or refuse. So deferral isn't really captured in that, but we can put that suggestion and that interim arrangement, if you would like to call it that in terms of a parklet for the time being.
Can I just ask a question there just for clarity? That development application, don't those rules apply if it is on land that is owned? Just because if the land is not zoned or owned, why do the provisions of the Development Act apply to it? It's not just a request to use someone else's land? I'm assuming there can't be a Form 1 because the owner of the Form 1 hasn't signed the application. So it wouldn't. I'm curious as to how it's defined as a DA.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it is a DA. The Form 1 would need to be signed by the landowner, being, in this instance, the Department of Planning, Land and Heritage.
But at this stage, have they signed it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, at this time they have not, but we have been liaising with the department, perhaps.
So just for clarity, at the moment, it's not a DA because the Form 1 hasn't been signed by the owner of the land. So it's just a request to be able to use land that the applicant doesn't actually have access to. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So yes, the form is with the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage for consideration, and you're correct, there's not a valid development application at this time.
Councillor,
Sorry, my last
continue.
question. Sorry, my last question. Just regarding the $30 a square metre on the space evaluation. What was the? How did we come to that figure, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, can provide more details in the briefing notes, but that was quite a lot of discussion when the draft development on city-owned and managed land policy did come to council, and we looked at different fee structures. So we looked at fixed fees. I think there was consideration of around 1,000 to 1,500. We looked at the fact that alfresco structures can have different areas, so we didn't think a fixed fee would be appropriate. We consulted with the community on the fee, and based on that, our recommendation to council was $30 a square metre, and so that was what's in the draft policy and what's applied for the Flying Scotsman's application as well. So that fee was approved by council in that instance.
And the Flying Scotsman is on the footpath.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So yes, road reserve as well, and that is like the verge footpath area.
Sorry, were you going to ask another question, Councillor Toppelberg? Go ahead, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just a question I guess this is brought into some stark contrast, the draft policy and also our parklet policy. And so am I correct in saying that according to our current parklet policy, that a parklet wouldn't be approved without adjacent neighbour approval or, support?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe so, yes.
Are you aware if the adjacent, I'm sorry to the people in the chamber, I was hearing a lot of 400s, etc. I can't exactly recall if the adjacent neighbours affected to this were in support or not supportive of this application, or if they've been consulted?
Through you, Mayor Cole, they have been consulted. I will confirm the nature of their response if they made a response through briefing notes.
I note that the application hasn't been assessed directly against the draft policy, but it's talked about that the application would be considered to be consistent with the objectives. However, I note that the draft, the approval that's been up for recommendation, the recommendation that's up for approval, talks about new plans were being required to be submitted and imposes a number of conditions. Appreciate this is a movable feast in terms of cafe blinds and smoking, etc. But just has this been considered for incorporation into the next iteration of the policy in terms of some of those new provisions that we've sort of developed in recent time?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. We're looking at considering no cafe blinds and no smoking, and then we bring that to council for discussion.
And I guess the other question is relating to the substantial change to the land use, whether that has been contemplated, noting that the current land use for the area is for parking and the proposed really pulls it completely away from that, and just wondering if that's been considered for inclusion.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so just to clarify, do you mean depending on the how substantial the change in the current use is, should the terms be different or the level of consultation? Is that what you're thinking?
Just it may well be worthwhile having some direction in relation to the extent of land use change that would be contemplated, I guess, potentially to save people a whole bunch of time going in the track, but I'll talk to that next week. Just wondering if there's, and I'm sorry if I've missed this, has there been engagement with service providers in terms of gas and power and et cetera that may well be underneath those car bays that sit there currently?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have been liaising with our engineering department, and there are specifications for outdoor eating permits, clearances from such services and infrastructure, and we are satisfied that there's adequate clearance.
That's it from me.
Thank you. Can we get some comments just in relation to the question that was asked via email about the disposition of land and whether the licence, as opposed to whether it actually, given the nature of it and what's proposed, whether it actually is exempt and why we believe, why the city, because the comments in the report provide the circumstances under which it would be exempt, but don't actually specify why the city believes it may or may not be exempt from the disposition of land section of the Act.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So yes, we have referred to that regulation, so 32A, I believe it is. And first of all, we do believe this is a disposition. So the definition of a disposition in the Local Government Act is to dispose of property, means like transfer it, but not necessarily exclusively. So we're proposing to enter into a licence. That's not exclusive use, but that still amounts to a disposal. If you're one of the exemptions from providing public notice, and the one we believe this is exempt under is because its value is under $5,000. So we've discussed with the valuer, they say it's very hard to provide an exact valuation for road reserve area being used as an Alfresco area, but the land would inherently have a very nominal value. So on that basis, we're saying it's under $5,000, and the requirements of Regulation 32A are that the value has to be under $5,000, and also it has to be only of value to the adjacent to that person. So in this case, the adjacent owner, it is of value to them. It wouldn't really be of value to anyone else, and it's under $5,000. So on that basis, we're saying it's exempt from the public notice requirements.
Okay, just a couple of things about dollars. So just for clarity, that's $5,000 is the value of the land, or the value of what, is that an annual value of what the
value of the disposition, so that would be like the annual licence fee.
Okay, and just in terms of Councillor Smith's question earlier about the how the city arrived at the fee, in the response that Council had endorsed the draft policy on the basis of what was proposed in terms of consultation, can I clarify, Council has not either received any advice or made any comments, I'm not asking it as a question, in relation to the value of development on city-owned land where that land is currently used for parking. My understanding is the draft policy and those numbers that were spoken about was land that was otherwise effectively used for footpath or other potentially road reserve, but not actually road or car parking. That wasn't contemplated, or has that been contemplated in any of the discussions with Council or the draft policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, that's correct. That hasn't been contemplated before.
And in terms of just asking Councillor Smith's question again, which is a question back to Mr Naidu, given that's established that we don't actually have a DA before us, the options available to Council do include the option to say there's no rights of appeal or otherwise, given that there's no DA, so therefore it is at Council's discretion to say until we have a broad view on a policy that talks about development on council-owned land that or otherwise, we're not obliged to actually make an assessment on the current proposal. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, and to clarify, in that scenario, it's where the DA remains unsigned as the landowner. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's currently, the DA has not been signed. Okay, so it's not a complete application, and it is currently with the department. In the scenario that it is signed before next Tuesday's council meeting, then you have a live application for consideration. If it remains unsigned, then it is incomplete and it would not progress.
Can I confirm that, like any other applicant in the city, there'd be 90 days from the city receiving a signed application to be able to make that assessment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be correct.
But in addition to all of that, is it not the case that the applicant would still require the city to enter into a licence to dispose of this land to allow for the DA to progress?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, ultimately, from the applicant's perspective, they want the outcome of being able to, construct this permanent alfresco. They would require both planning approval as well as a licence approval from council to use that space.
And is it the case that this DA or the invalid DA is before us because of the fact that there were more than 5 objections?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it relates to a couple of matters. One is because of the licence, but also because of the 5 objections that you referred to.
But would it be correct to read these two things as separate, the licence application and the DA application?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, there's 2 components to this. Ultimately, we've just taken the opportunity to present you with the development application because it's important to note that administration does have delegation to deal with a DA, but it's, I guess from administration's perspective, we thought it would be neater to present both for your consideration.
And meet our policy requirement. Can I just ask though, would there be a situation where a development application of this nature could be approved ahead of the licence being approved by council?
Through Mayor Cole, there is a scenario where a development application could be approved preceding a licence, but ultimately the licence would need to be approved for them to be able to undertake the works on site and use that space for that purpose.
Okay, I'm just saying some significant issues with this approach, and I'm thinking when the draft policy makes it back, I might be flagging an amendment around delegation of development applications for this type of application in the public, on public land. Can I ask a few more questions? So I know there's a lot of questions tonight. I just wanted to ask about the fact that we currently have the draft policy, it's been advertised, and we've heard tonight that we've had significant community feedback in relation to that policy. Could we have in the report some dialogue about the fact that we have a draft policy that's been advertised and the timeframe at which that will be returning to council for recommended endorsement? I also just wanted to ask whether there had been any discussion with the policy in place team about feedback received at the town team roundtable in relation to use of development on city-owned land. I'd also just like to check the extent of the radius for the consultation. Was it done by not kilometres, by metres? For example, was it 150 metres, or was it done to a lesser extent? If we could have a response to that in the report. I also just wanted to ask whether there'd been any feedback sought from service agencies, including gas, water, power, in relation to permanent Alfresco on road reserve. I also just wanted to ask whether there's any qualifying statements around entertaining a structure of this nature requiring both day and night activation, so that if there was a transfer in ownership, a small bar, for example, opening at 6 p.m. and not having activation of that during the daytime, had that been considered? Also, what is the width of the pedestrian access through the middle? We have had issues where it's been 1.5 metres, and I think COVID has certainly highlighted that. And I also just wanted to ask a question that Councillor Gontaszewski sometimes asks, in that when we see a development application before us, it's conditioned to an extent that the applicant no longer wishes to proceed. Should that actually be conditioned? Because the applicant's representative tonight has indicated that clause 3.1 modified plans would not be acceptable to them.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there are a number of questions. I'll take all of them on notice. The latter, important. We will liaise with the applicant offline, but agreed in terms of principle. If it alters the development wherein it's not what the applicant is actually seeking, then I guess the alternative is to simply refuse the application.
Thank you. And CEO, just to you, a number of governance issues have been raised this evening, and I would seek your review of this report in light of those issues being raised. Councillors, Councillor Toppelberg.
So I just had 2 more questions. Firstly, proposed clause 1.1, which deals with the term and the 5-year option. Can we get clarity as to at whose option that 5 years is, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so that was their option, which is in line with the draft development on city owner maintain policy. But we can, I think whenever you see option and it's not at the city's sole discretion, it's the other party's, not the city's option, but we can make that clearer.
Thank you. And just under the existing parklet policy, if the application was made and the structure wasn't as permitted, if the application was made to install a parklet in those 2 car parking bays, and the consultation was undertaken as it has been for this, and the response from the adjoining neighbours, which under the policy, can I just get some clarity as to where that application would have ended up? Would it have ended up coming to council? Would it have been refused, or what would have happened to that application if under the existing parklet policy, the owners of the current business had sought to put some form of seating structure in those 2 car parking bays? I'll speak more next week about that, but I'm curious as to how that process differs other than the physical structure from what we're currently being asked to look.
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps I'll liaise with our policy and place team offline who deal with the parklets and provide that in the briefing notes.
Am I correct that if the adjoining property did not object, then those 2 parking bays would be able to be used for the purpose of alfresco dining or otherwise, or under the definitions in the parklet policy? And according to the advice we had earlier, if the neighbouring businesses were not in support of it, then that process would end there and then. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll account for that in liaising with our administration team.
It looks like someone is eager to give the answer this evening. If we can get the answer this evening, that may be a benefit given the interest in the gallery.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it goes back to the comment earlier about the 3 community consultation that the parklet requires. So it would be about those adjacent landowners, the surrounding businesses that are also affected, the advertisement online for 14 days and the notice in the business window. So we would consider all 3 of those pieces. So it wouldn't necessarily be that if the adjacent owners wouldn't have all of that power, I suppose, if you like, we would assess all of that and make the recommendation based on that.
Sorry, can I just ask a follow-up question? So on the next page of the parklet policy under section 7 selection process, where it talks 2 features of a successful application, there's a little tick there that says demonstrated support from neighbouring residents and businesses. Is that, so you're saying that that's an or under all of those things, or that's an and in relation to the features of a successful application?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's the and support of neighbouring businesses, that's both adjoining and surrounding businesses. We can provide an example of a consultation approach that we've done for an example of a parklet to show how that's been done in the past.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Just a quick question, and this might fall under the governance issues that you flagged for follow-up earlier. I just looked up the disposition of property excluded from the Act under the local government regs 30. It says that the local government does not consider, for the disposition to be exempt, the local government does not consider that the ownership of land would be of significant benefit to anybody other than the transferee. Given that the current use of the land is a publicly available car park, would that still be considered exempt if there's kind of like a demonstrated benefit by its current use?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so as this does relate to the carriageway, so the road, and in previous and in the draft policy, we have considered just the verge area. I guess we haven't contemplated that, so we will consider that further and whether that would change. Thank you.
I'm just also wondering if that goes to the value that the city has of the parking bays, because at the moment it's restricted but unpaid. But if in the future, sorry folks, but if in the future we move to paid parking, and I'm not signalling that at all, would that not have a value to the city of more than $5,000?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's a good point as well. And the valuation we have previously obtained related to verge area only. So this is a different situation when it is road carriageway with on-street parking.
Okay, any further questions? We've been on 5.2 for some time. Okay, we're going to move on. Okay, the next items raised, I'm just going to see, is anyone still here for 6.5? Yes, okay, so I'll go to 6.5 next because the other questions were from a submitter who's not in the public gallery. So item 6.5 is Safe Active Streets, Florence Strathcona Golding Project. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, and I'm happy for these to be taken on notice. I understand that we received a deputation from a representative of the owner or owners of all the properties on the western side that front Golding Street. If we are, and this, my understanding from the benefit of Google is that there are currently on the western side five crossovers into that side. From what I can see, I don't know exactly how many properties there are, but there's a small number of properties, but they are quite large. And I think that there are 3, maybe 4 crossovers to the western side. Sorry, to the eastern side. If we take the submission or the deputation at face value, which says that Golding Street is inappropriate because of the vehicular traffic that requires access and the nature of it, and well, are we to then also assume that there is no way to safely get bicycle traffic on a road carriageway from Old Aberdeen Street to Newcastle Street, given that the other options would be the freeway, Cleaver Street, or Loftus Street, or am I still in Perth? So the only other option would be at the other end, which is Douglas Street. So Tandy Street, Douglas Street. Can we get some comments around why Tandy or Douglas may or may not be considered appropriate? Because otherwise, and if we have any other information also to support the city's view that Golding Street is appropriate, given our understanding of the nature of particularly the heavy vehicle traffic that utilises that road.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Essentially, the origins, part of it lies in the pedestrian crossing on Vincent Street, which is on the corner of Florence Street. If it had been as was originally proposed, we might have been able to do something with Cleaver Street, but where it is now, there's no direct link then to bring the traffic across Newcastle Street and up to the ones you refer to, which is Douglas Street, etc. Golding Street is the most direct route on the cycle network. When we did the long-term cycle network, that was one of the routes identified, was Florence, Strathcona and Golding Street as being appropriate to link to the principal shared path. I don't think it's insurmountable to make it safe for both road users, the current land users and also the bikes. I also note that since the demise of City Motors, the traffic volume has changed and they may continue into the future depending on what the outcome of that site is. We don't have any current data, but as a result of this discussion, I'll try and arrange some data over the next few days, inclusive of the weekend, just to get a snapshot of what it currently looks like.
Thank you. And just particularly for the benefit of Ms. Slythe, who made the comments about speeding cyclists, etc., can we just get some comments around the difference between safe, active street road treatments and dedicated bike lanes and the intended outcome for users of the road in general, and also obviously in plan seeing, I'll just get the terminology that we use, but seeing the painted surfaces on the road, piano paintings, etc., and just get an idea of what the sort of height and scale of some of those humps, etc., and how those treatments may differ from if it was to be bicycle priority to the extent of dedicated bike lanes.
Through you, Mayor Cole. To me, the plateaus are proposed for both streets are on average 100 mils at their peak, but they're flat on top. And hold as much, restrict bike speeds as much as they do vehicle speeds. I mean, a cyclist is not going to be going more than 30 k's an hour going over those things. So it holds true to both forms of traffic that they won't be exceeding, or their intentions, they won't be exceeding 30 kilometres an hour.
And the request was made, well, I understand it's at our discretion, but the request was made for the matter to be deferred so that there could be further consultation and understanding. Are you comfortable that some of the issues that have been raised, obviously the data can't be garnered in the next 7 days, but some of the issues that have been raised could be potentially addressed through conversation on site with the landowner on Golding Street prior to next week's meeting? We could get some further advice. Is that something that would be possible?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm more than willing to meet the applicant and their representative to discuss the options. I don't think it's insurmountable. I mean, we're not actually restricting or blocking access to any of these properties. We're basically trying to moderate the speed and just make it more a friendlier mix for bicycles and commercial traffic.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. For the intersection where Strathcona turns into Newcastle and then turns from Newcastle into Golding, how are cyclists to get from those 2 points to each other? I know there's a bike path on the southern side, but I don't think there is anything on the northern side. I was just wondering about that actual getting across Newcastle Street, which can be quite busy.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the intention is the cyclists to be on the road coming down Strathcona Street, and they'll have the option, I'm just having a look to see if our drawings included, of coming up onto the footpath and crossing at that point, or crossing the road. So there is no specific treatment at that intersection and cutting to the end.
So they would either need to go up onto the, is there a median that's wide enough to fit a bike there, or the potential to include something like that?
Because of the works that were through you, Mayor Cole, because of the works that were done as part of the realignment of the bus routes up Cleaver Street, that's where the lanes go from 2 to 1. So off the top of my head, we'd have to have a look at that, but I don't think we can. Yeah, I don't think we can accommodate a pedestrian refuge island at that point.
I'm just thinking through the logistics of a cyclist coming down those routes and how they're going to get across, and if we're creating a problem there in that process. And I can see how it would work coming up if you've got the bike lane there, and then you could lean across and turn right. But it'd be quite challenging, I think, for somebody coming down potentially. So I don't know if you've got any insights on that, or if there's an opportunity to look at the orientation somehow or something.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have that discussion with the Department of Transport bike unit as well, because at this stage, we sat down and collaborated with them on the design, and they were quite comfortable with what we have designed through the consultants. But I will have that conversation with them, because you're right, it could be problematic getting across Newcastle Street.
Councillor Konchevsky, did you have a question?
I did. There was a number of people through, I think there was 3 respondents through the consultation that talked about sightlines for people exiting right of ways, just wanting to get commentary on that. And then the other thing was there was also comments in relation to the get confirmation that there will be no changes to the dual lane nature of the roads, even at this crossing points of the speed humps. So speed humps, not chicanes, so that the traffic is 2 lanes all the way down.
That's correct. It will remain as two-way traffic without any mid-block listers. For want of a better description, there'll be plateaus to moderate the speed. And apologies, I forgot. No, the first part of the question was about right-of-way and access. Well, it doesn't actually change. I mean, because obviously we're bringing the speed down from 50 to 30. The cars are already parked on the street. So fundamentally, there's no material change to the sightlines. It's certainly not to the detriment.
I think the question related to perhaps some of the placement of the trees near some of the lanes, the exit points to the right of ways, is just advice as to whether that's likely to improve, or I would perceive it as being less of a visual disturbance than a vehicle, but just wondering if there's any concerns around placement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we're only talking 3 trees, and I'm pretty confident that we can adequately locate them without creating a sight distance issue.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on the topic of this chicane, so the the logic for not doing something like a horizontal displacement rather than vertical displacement was to increase the vehicle traffic flow?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, it's to maintain the parking because we didn't actually consult with the residents on taking out parking. We actually emphasised they weren't going to lose any parking.
So if we were to put chicanes in, then that would take out parking, and that was the reason for that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct, yeah.
And if we did put in something like chicanes, is that likely to decrease the number of vehicles that you travel down that street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it'd be a bit of speculation because there's already established traffic patterns there now. So I wouldn't think so. It's not a high percentage commercial, so it's not going to dissuade commercial traffic. It's majority light traffic. And there's no reason to say that they would change their preferred route, whether it's a blister or a speed hump.
And if council was of a view to replace the speed bumps with chicanes instead, would that be an alternative recommendation, or would that be a modification to the existing application? And would we then need to go back out for another round of community consultation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it would be my view that we'd have to consult with the affected residents because they'd be immediately impacted by the loss of parking out the front.
So it would be an alternative recommendation then?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's an option. Yeah, we can do an alternative recommendation.
Are you able to provide some details in the briefing of what that would look like, just in terms of parking spaces that were lost and additional cost over what we're already considering here?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Just a couple of questions just about the consultation process, and just one in relation to the comment in the report around the planning consultant that we've heard from in the public gallery. They gave quite a detailed submission. From what I can see, the city's response is just the sentence that disagrees with their submission. And just wondering where the more detailed response is.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I noticed that this afternoon, and we talk about streetlights, which is not what they asked in the summary of the public comments on the last page, I believe it is. So it was obviously put in the wrong spot in error, so we will rectify that for next week.
And just in terms of the consultation, from what I saw in terms of what residents received, it was the quite simplified cartoony map of the space, which is very user-friendly and appealing. And I know it's co-branded with the Department of Transport, so maybe we have limits to what we could do. But I know the submission from the planning consultant did have a figure of the engineering plan, and just wondering if residents did have access to that, because it did seem like there was a lot of confusion around what actually did this look like, because the spots on the map that was provided perhaps less clear.
Through you, Mayor Cole. In regards to the first part of the question, Department of Transport want to standardise the drawings or diagrams that are presented to the public for all safe active streets, hence the one we've got on the report. But it was available, the more detailed ones were available on our Imagine Vincent site.
Can I add something to that as well? I think the letter actually stated that if you wanted to see more detailed plans, to contact administration. And I know from speaking to the manager's colleagues that he did have a number of calls, and some people did see the plans, including the planning consultant.
Okay, I guess, yeah, when I looked at Imagine Vincent, it only had that other map. So perhaps it's been taken down. Thanks.
Councillors, any further questions? I just had a brief question. It might be more for the manager of policy in place, but I just wondered that the city has been interested in looking to turn Clever Street into the main road in the Pickle District. I just wondered whether that concept would include any bike infrastructure, cycle paths, or a sort of slow speed environment that would be conducive to cycling, and whether we could potentially have a sort of dual cycling on adjacent roads.
Through you, Mayor Cole. When we looked at the works we've been intending to do on Cleaver Street, the local Pickle District, for want of a better name, group have got grand plans for creating...
Are you saying you don't like the name Pickle District? I think it's fabulous. There's no need for a new name.
No, I actually wasn't sure what they called themselves, whether it's a network, collective, group, or the Pickle District pub.
It's the Pickle District.
They asking us to enable them to put public art on the verge and create nibs so we can activate those spaces. So we'd have to, and we also, the proposal looks at putting trees down the middle to create a boulevard. And depending on the outcome of policy in places funding application, it also will include streetlights down the middle of Cleaver Street to emphasise the boulevard effect. So if we go down that path, then we wouldn't be able to accommodate the bike lanes as well.
So I'm assuming it wouldn't be wide enough to have anything other than a shed space.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and just in relation to the amount of commercial vehicles on Golding Street, have we had data collection there that can give us a breakdown of regular vehicles versus commercial?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I had a quick look prior to this discussion. The last data count was 600 per day and it was on average 6% commercial. But that's obviously changed now since the demise of City Motors. So I'm hoping to arrange very quickly to do a data count over the next 4 days, including the weekend. So we've got something to base it on by next Tuesday night.
That'd be great. Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Okay, moving on. These two items were raised through written questions. So the first item is 6.3, which is North Perth Traffic Report. Questions on this item, please? No questions? Okay. Oh, Councillor Hallett, yes.
Because it's combined a few different things in there. I'm just wondering about, in terms of the attachments, there's one around the View Street bit, but hasn't included a map of the proposed one, single points around the area, and it's not detailed enough in the actual report because it just says between two streets where they are.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll include that diagram in the report for next week.
I guess just to differentiate between the oval versus the other one and the locations. I guess also just given the interest in the community around the intersection with greening, whether there's landscape kind of options that could be included in that for clarity for residents as well. And then also whether it's useful to give the GTA report as an appendix, given that it's been such a long process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can certainly add the report as an appendix. If you're referring to median, given it was a trial, we weren't looking at actually digging up the road pavement at that stage until the 12-month period had finished, and then.
Sorry, not the median, the slow points in the other area.
My apologies. And we can look at. Well, the initial proposal was to have a tree or trees in the nib. So depending on whether we go with the blister or the single lane slow point, there would be vegetation involved.
Trees would be awesome. So did you just request a plan of the slow points to be included? Yes, that was my question too. Any other questions on this item? Another question from Councillor Hallett.
And just to confirm, in terms of Andrew Main's questions, will we get those in the briefing notes prior to next week?
Through you, Mayor Cole. There's a lot of them, but yes.
Any further questions? Okay, moving on to item 6.6, which is Urban Road Safety Program Pilot Implementation of Mini Roundabouts. Questions on this item, please? Councillor Wallace.
Would there be any costs for removal of the roundabouts at the end of the trial period if we decided that we didn't like the results?
Through you, Mayor Cole, Main Roads are calling it a pilot one because they're hoping it doesn't have to come out rather than a trial. Yes, obviously there would be costs involved, which they haven't committed to funding, but it'd be relatively inexpensive, I would think.
Another question from Councillor Wallace. Yep, go ahead.
Could we include cyclist groups within the consultation plan? I think we've just been planning on consulting with local residents, but as it's kind of a major cycling route, I think it's well worth getting their input.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can. And we've already had a few preliminary discussions with the Department of Transport Cycling Unit when we were talking about the safe active street proposal for Norfolk. So, but yes, we can do that.
I had a question just in relation to the recommendation. Normally when we're considering something like this, it's usually clause 2 would say something like approval that council gives approval to advertise. I'm just wondering about the approves in principle subject to public consultation, even though we do need to receive a further report. Was there any reason to go with in principle as opposed to approval to advertise?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Main roads are on a pretty strict timeline, and we just wanted to give an indication whether there was support within council to proceed to consultation in the anticipation that would be successful. They have to give us the money, and we have to have it constructed by June 30 next year.
But this says approve in principle the installation of, should we say something like approves the consultation or endorses the I don't know, just a question about the necessity for us to approve in principle, though that we're still saying that's subject to consultation, which would be our normal requirement that we would consult before we declare our hands.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can make that amendment.
And it would be good to know, given that Main Roads is on a time frame, could we perhaps have an indication of when that further report is likely to come back to council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, what we're hoping to do is to consult after the blackout period in the new year with the anticipation of getting a report back in March, because then if we're successful, we'd almost be immediately moving into construction.
I do understand those constraints. I thank you for that. Are there any further? Did you just sneeze on Councillor Wallace? Sorry, I just caught that out of my corner of my eye. Any further questions on this item? Okay, now we will go back to the beginning of the agenda and deal with the items that we haven't already dealt with. So that takes us to item 5.1, development application licence to locate a fence in the Gregson Street Road Reserve adjacent to number 76 Newcastle Street, Perth. Any questions on this item? Okay. Item 5.3, number 12 Florence Street, West Perth, 4 grouped dwellings. Any questions on this one? No, okay. Item 5.4, number 195 to 117 Agena Street, Mount Hawthorn. Proposed signage, questions? Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to condition 3, can you provide some commentary on the process where you're kind of checking potential sponsors and how the city would differentiate between what's excluded as an alcohol related service and what that means for the Oxford Hotel?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, this came up in the assessment process, and it's important to note that those might be the sponsors at any one time, including Oxford Hotel, but those things might change. So the principle of structuring this condition was really just to set those parameters. I think it's more about visually what was going to be displayed. In terms of the Oxford Hotel, as an example, the branding of the Oxford Hotel would not be an issue in terms of this particular condition. I guess there is that judgment call because it needs to be to the satisfaction of the city ultimately. But yeah, ultimately, given that the nature of it is around a sponsor, a third party, that from a planning perspective, we felt that there needed to be some sort of control around the content of the sign. And that's the purpose of condition 3.
Councillors, I have to ask a question about the classification of this as a billboard, given the city's position on billboards, and whether we need to do a potentially, if we're going to consider this, would we need to look at an amendment to our signage policy to allow for something else along the lines of a not-for-profit sponsorship of a local community group? Just how would we go in defending use of billboards at the State Administrative Tribunal if we're approving billboards, signage classified as billboards on our own property in our public open space?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. There's a section in the report that has address this on page 196 of the agenda under the title signage policy. So we acknowledge that there was the NOM from October. In terms of the definition of billboard, it's difficult to say that this is not a billboard ultimately, because they're not offering the products or services from the oval, the POS. But in saying that, we have made the distinction that ultimately it's a related function of the use of that space. And we've got two clubs and the sponsors relate to the club. So we've just acknowledged that, notwithstanding all of that, ultimately when we receive a planning application, we need to assess against clause 67 matters, and that includes the planning policy. But in addition, we also need to consider it about the purpose of the reserve and the function and such. So on that basis, it's not that we can't consider the proposal, it's just important that we make that distinction between what we ordinarily have dealt with in terms of billboard signage in this forum and what is before you. It's slightly different in terms of the nature.
Can I also then ask, in we have a NOM that requests the review of the policy. Could we have some thought around advertising in public open space within the policy? And I think that if we're going to go down the path of allowing not-for-profit sporting clubs to have sponsorship signage, that we need to look at how we classify that within the policy, because usually I think when people think third-party advertising, they think that this is for financial benefit, but this is really around sponsorship of a not-for-profit. So can we somehow differentiate between that moving forward? I'm also unsure whether the signage where, based on the plan or diagram provided, I'm unsure whether the additional signage area is just the cricket signage itself, and whether the signage deemed sponsorship signage is currently going to be swapped out between seasons between the Cardinals and the cricket club.
Through you, Mayor Cole, to your first question around the consideration of the policy review, yes, we will definitely consider that as part of the policy review. We'll discuss that in a workshop conversation and flesh that out a bit more in terms of how we can differentiate between third-party or more conventional third-party advertising and not-for-profit advertising, like this scenario. In regards to your follow-up question about clarification of what's being sought in terms of the approval, ultimately there's an existing approval for the Cardi's logo, and then there were two sponsor side just adjacent to that. Now, what is being sought is the addition of the club logo for the cricket club, which will sit just to the left of the Cardi's existing sign. And then where the two existing sponsor signs are, they will in effect remain, and you will simply just have two additional sponsor signs to the right of that. Now, given that the Cardi's season and the cricket club seasons don't overlap, for the duration of each of those seasons, they will have the opportunity to provide 4 of their sponsors. And then at the end of the season, they'll switch out for 4 of the sponsors of the alternate club, if that makes sense.
Thanks, but I'll just say, I'm looking at page 202 and it's got the cricket club logo next to the Cardinals sign, which is a much bigger sign, and then it has prospective new sponsor sign. So when I looked at this, I assumed that there were sponsorship signs there existing for Cardinals, and that this meant that those signs would simply be swapped out summer and winter between the two clubs. Are you saying that they'll actually be moving from 2 sponsorship signs to 4?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. Okay. Going from 2 to 4.
And can I just ask whether we've received any complaints about advertising in this public open space?
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps through briefing notes, I'll confirm that.
Thank you. Councillor Hallett?
Slightly maybe tangential, but building on that, just wondering about our eco signs that are around the city and how they might be excluded from our billboard signage. Is it just because they're not third party, but are they if they're advertising other events that are not ours? Yeah.
Can we have that one in the briefing notes perhaps? Okay, thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Do we know the financial benefit that's been provided to the club by displaying this advertising?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to clarify in terms of the actual monetary figure.
Yeah, how much extra they're getting for displaying the advertising?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, we are not aware of that. We can reach out to them and better understand if that will help you inform your decision.
Thanks. And I noted that the signs are planned to be interchangeable or to be able to be taken down. Would it be reasonable to request that the advertising is only displayed when the area is being utilised by the clubs?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to confirm, so while it's the cricket season, then it's exclusively for
on the day while they're playing cricket and utilising the field, but when it's otherwise being utilised as public open space, would it be reasonable to request that the advertising is taken down?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can put it to the applicant. I would suspect that there'd be some impost around having to continually remove them and put them back up. But we can ask them and provide that in the briefing notes.
Whilst we're asking the applicant questions, because I think there is this principle of expanding the level of signage, I'm just wondering whether we could just potentially keep to the same footprint and just alternate 2 sponsors, summer and winter, for each club. Why does it need to go from 2 to 4? Could that please be put to the applicant, that we could sort of keep within the same footprint and not expand the level of advertising from 2 sponsors to 4, but that they simply swap it out? Was that the intention, that they were going to swap out all 4, or that they were going to have 2 and 2 and not touch them?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that their intention is to utilise all 4. We can put that again to the applicant. I guess what's before us is what they had proposed, and we've assessed it against the relevant planning framework, and it's something that can be supported. But if there's an alternate that you're seeking that you would like some advice on from the applicant, we can definitely put those suggestions to them.
Would they even require council approval if the existing sponsorship signage is approved for the Cardinals and they then provided their own sponsorship signage in the summer? Would that require approval from council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to clarify, to switch out those signs, the 2 existing signs.
So could we actually get to a position where council was asked to approve the addition of the club logo, but that if we did stick to the original, the existing sponsorship footprint, and they were simply to swap out the signage with the Cardinals, would that require council approval?
Through you, Mayor Cole, let me have a look at the existing approval and see the terms of that and the controls in place.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Next we have 104 Eaton Street, North Perth, proposed alterations and additions to a single house carport. I understand the applicant has sought a deferral. Has this been withdrawn by administration?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it has.
It's been withdrawn. Okay, well then we can cross that off the list. Okay, next is 5.6, Northbridge Entertainment Precinct, amendment number 41 to the City of Perth City Planning Scheme number 2. Any questions? No. Has there been any renewed opportunity to go down to the Jua Sound Modelling Centre?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the equipment came in today. We'll let you know.
Thank you. Perhaps if there is strong interest, maybe someone we could, I mean, I don't think I can, but if anyone else wants to try to squeeze it in, we'll see how we go. I did just want to ask one question, Acting Director, in relation to the existing noise being received by City of Vincent premises based on the existing situation. Does that reflect the amendment or the modified amendment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the existing noise received doesn't really reflect either. This is modelling based on the core and frame of the two maps. So the existing noise is entirely dependent on what each venue is doing at the moment. I'm fairly sure the City of Perth is not actively enforcing compliance with the noise regs due to it just being untenable in that particular precinct. So it's difficult to predict. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to get a feel for is the amendment as originally proposed. Would that be closer to the current experience than the modified amendment? Or I'm just trying to sort of realise that if we support the modified amendment, will City of Vincent residents be experiencing less noise than they are now, or potentially more noise, or is that just too difficult to understand without having done noise modelling at each of their premises or house rather?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, it is very difficult to draw the comparison. What I would say is that the amendment enables all of the properties within that core and frame to be utilised for that purpose. So if we look at the future impacts, then it could really pardon the pun, but it could really amplify the level of noise that is received within Vincent compared to what it is now based on the scheme amendment.
Sorry, I'm trying to get a feel for whether the modified amendment would be a significant winding back of what's currently happening, because I think the intent of the entertainment precinct was to support live music and to have that sort of more tolerance within an entertainment precinct for noise. So I'm just trying to seek some assurance that if we do support as recommended, that we're not sort of trying to enforce a significant wind back of noise emitting from Northbridge.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I don't have any indication that supporting option B would be a significant wind back of what it is right now. It's more that this particular proposal create some control around it, because at the moment you might have one venue in the northeastern part of Northbridge being excessively loud and another venue very close to Vincent further down the road being much quieter. So it's really difficult to do accurate modelling around that, because it all depends on what the venue is doing on any given day. So it's a very difficult question to answer. I can see if I can get some more information on that. But the modelling of what is happening now would just be so variable based on the fact that there aren't core decibel limits set for a core and a frame.
Okay, I absolutely get that. I guess I'm looking for some assurance that if we adopt the modified version, that we're still showing our support for the principle of an entertainment area, and that we're not taking an ultra-conservative approach to noise in Northbridge. I think that's just hard to differentiate when you don't know the comparison between what's currently happening versus what's proposed in the original option or the modified option.
Yes, in my view, in my view, both options do support the previous principle that has been endorsed by our council to actually support the concept of special control areas and entertainment precincts. I think that really in terms of, if we look at Amendment 41 in particular and those contour lines of the 67 dB, what that reflects is that any premises within that particular area could receive unreasonable noise. At the moment, we don't receive many complaints. So if that's an indication regarding what the status quo is at the moment, then that's probably the best that I can provide to you for today.
Thank you, appreciate that. Any further questions? Okay, next item is 5.7, the City of Vincent Rebound Plan Quarterly Update. Any questions? Okay. We've dealt with amendment to parklets policy. So we move to item 5.9, Beatty Park 2062 project update. Questions? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just let me go to here. I don't know if I have questions. I think I probably just will foreshadow an alternative recommendation that I'll work on over the coming week to provide some more clarity on the method in which I personally would like to see the community engaged on this topic and direction. I'll just let you know that's coming. So enjoy.
It's all right. You're allowed to foreshadow amendments and alternates. That's appreciated. It helps.
Through you, Mayor, could I just mention that the project steering committee did meet this week to discuss some of the elements of how that consultation could take place, and we could circulate an updated version of that communications plan to council.
That would be very useful. Thank you, CEO.
Yes, I just wanted to check at the meeting that we had. Was it just yesterday? Yes, something like that. That I did request more detailed information in the communication plan, and also whether we could start considering more detailed costings of restoration work at the grandstand, which would be within our capability to afford, even in a staged way, if the advocacy program doesn't result in funding assistance.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we will be preparing some of that advice in preparation for the budget workshops commencing in the new year. And we are working on a draft expression of interest for the community panel, which will be circulated to project steering committee members shortly. I might just ask the manager to comment on that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that will be distributed this week. And just to note, the communications plan has been updated following the steering group committee and included in this agenda.
Yes, I did see that might have come in very late as part of the composite agenda. So I thought I saw that update, but I didn't have time to read it. Thank you. Appreciate the quick response on that one. Can I also just clarify, yesterday when I asked about the emergency works that was recommended by the structural engineer, Peter Baxendale, to stop the water egress into the grandstand, which was sort of referred to as critical maintenance. And I think it was around the $350,000 mark. I can't recall the exact figure. I was told that that wasn't on budget and those works weren't planned, but the report states that those works, the 2.9 million works, include that critical maintenance work. So can I just get some clarity on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we do have some details from the manager of the Beatty Park Leisure Centre that in year one, the work went to is going towards gutters, ceiling panels, exposed rust on beams, and bringing the grandstand electricals up to code. And there is provision in the long-term financial plan for years 2 and 3 to have additional money going towards risk renewals, and what that detail looks like is still to be determined.
Okay, I'm just seeking absolute clarification on this because Peter Baxendale gave a very specific figure to prevent further water coming into the grandstand so that we can preserve and not see that further deterioration through water coming in. And I just would like to double check whether that's been fully funded as part of that initial maintenance.
Through Mayor Cole, yeah, we'll check that.
Thank you. Also just wanted to highlight in the report, it talks about the advocacy that's taken place, but it doesn't mention the on-site meeting with the Honourable Mick Murray, MLA Minister for Sport, and John Carey, MLA Member for Perth, and also doesn't mention the letter to Senator Dean Smith, and Senator Smith has flagged that he would be available very early in the new year to attend Beatty Park. So could that also be captured in the report?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we'll update the report to
Thank
reflect
you.
those actions.
And I also thought that it warranted, in terms of the background, that this is a Class A reserve and the significance of it being a Class A reserve.
Through Mayor Cole, we can update that in the project background as well.
And I also just wanted to ask in relation to title of works, 6.5 Beatty Park Leisure Centre Options Project 200,000. Has that all been spent? That's on page 286. Because my understanding was that we hadn't spent that full allocation.
Through Mayor Cole, the project was initially funded to that level, and the expenditure in the previous financial year wasn't up to that level, and we did return some of that money. We did reduce that amount of money to be spent this financial year in the previous year's budget allocation.
Well, could that please be explained? Because if I was a community member reading this report, I would assume that the $200,000 budget impact meant that those funds were spent entirely.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can update that. That line item just reflects what the original budget allocation was by council, and that we can update what the actuals have been and what the current budget is for that project.
That would be helpful. And I think that if you go down further where it says 22 and 24, it just has ticks, and it would be useful to have figures there as well so that we can demonstrate what we have been spending on this project. And I also just wanted to request where we talk about engagement with Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, that's a pretty broad church, and I think it would be useful to clarify that we have been liaising with the Heritage representative, not planning. I think that could lead to people thinking that we were engaging with potential planning outcomes for the site when we've only been liaising with Heritage through DPLH on the working group.
Through Mayor Cole, just to clarify, yes, the DPLH has a representative on the project steering committee who is from the state heritage area of that department, but we have also been liaising with the lands division of DPLH about the Category 1 conservation aspect of that reserve and the land use potential.
I understand, but this is talking specifically about the project steering committee. That was all from me. Are there any further questions? Okay. Item 510, review of policy number 4.1.22, prosecution and enforcement. Any questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I'll send through further questions in an email, but we'll foreshadow a deferral for this policy. At this stage, I'm not satisfied that it meets the parameters of the previous documentation. Just one question though. Previously we had the policy and then we had the policy guidance document that seemed to be adopted all as one. But at this point in time, we're just being asked to look at the policy. Just wondering where the additional detail that was in the policy guidance document, or I'm forgetting the term, is my understanding from the report is that that's going to be transferred down to administrative procedures for each of the sections rather than covered in any sort of, I guess, policy direction about the manner in which enforcement or compliance activities should be conducted at a citywide level.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct.
Councillors. Okay. Moving on to the remaining infrastructure and environment items. 6.1 tender IE 66 of 2020 traffic management services appointment of successful tenderer. Any questions? Councillor Loden.
I have questions pertaining to the confidential attachment. So is it possible to bring them up at the end?
Sure, we do need to go into confidential session because we do have one confidential item this evening. So that's not that has to be the case. Of course we would. So I'll just flag that. Does anyone have any questions on this item that they'd like to ask in open session? Okay. Moving on to item 6.2, Asset Management and Sustainability Strategy 2020 to 2030. Any questions? Okay. We've dealt with 6.3, so we'll move to 6.4, Late Report Leaderville Laneway Upgrade. Just noting Councillor Smith is leaving the chamber for this one. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Questions in relation to the laneway upgrade? I think Councillor Hallett was first and then Councillor Loden.
Just wondering about, in terms of the consultation, I understand that the adjacent property owners are involved, but given that it's, I guess, a contribution to public land, public funds, whether or not broader consultations worthy of consideration?
Through Mayor Cole, could I just clarify, the question is about at what stage would that public consultation be undertaken in terms of proposed capital works before they proceeded, or in considering what the potential city contribution could be?
About the project as a whole.
Through Mayor Cole, my understanding is that the proponent has been liaising with adjoining landowners and businesses around the entire project, but I might just ask the manager to comment.
Through you, Mayor Cole, they've been concentrating on the people most directly affected. They haven't gone beyond the scope of the end of the right of way, so it really depends whether the council wants consultation to go further than that.
Sorry, just to also ask manager, I believe there's also some community consultation planned for naming of the laneway. I think that was probably more of a policy in place question, but that was something that I was informed about today, that element of consultation over the laneway naming is planned. I know that's not exactly what you're asking though.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yeah, that was my understanding as well, the policy in place, we're going to take charge of the laneway naming.
We didn't have any questions about the asset management sustainability strategy, but one of the things that does comment on is that we should include the asset renewal costs when we make decisions. And I was wondering if you had an idea if there's going to be an additional asset renewal cost for the city going forward as a result of this being implemented versus what we would have done otherwise?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. We haven't quantified it until we settle on the actual standard and materials we're using, but yeah, I would think that there will be further upkeep, so it's going to be more expensive than our standard treatment.
Councillor Tuppelberg.
Thank you. Just in terms of the consultation that's proposed, well, it's a question, but I guess at this stage, if we're being asked, because sometimes these things get ahead of us, just can we please get absolute clarity that anyone that requires access to that right of way as an owner or occupier has full knowledge of what is proposed day and night in there? And I'm talking about the people who are on the eastern side of the right of way who rely upon it to particularly to get vehicular access to their apartments and businesses. I understand that both we and the proposed partner in the project are doing some consultation, but can we just get absolute clarity through the process, whether it's now or later, that every person who requires access for their vehicle in particular is contacted regardless of if they're an owner or an occupier in those eastern properties?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll certainly talk to the team and policy in place, but yes, we should be able to do that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a comment or suggestion, we could potentially ask the place manager to bring this report, which being considered by council next Tuesday, to those landowners during the course of this week. Do you think that would be possible? Yep. Through Mayor Cole, we'll see if we can bring this report to
cancel all Christmas catch-ups.
Can I maybe ask the question in another way? If in the event that this is approved as recommended, what is the process from there for people who use the right of way as it's currently utilised or intended? What is the process for them to understand how that will function in terms of how and when they will be able to access their premises by vehicle? Will this just happen if this is approved as recommended? Given I understand there'd be some budget, there's some further budget approvals, but as far as the actual project itself, will this come back to council in any other form, or is the process from there administrative in terms of enacting the decision making if it's approved as recommended?
Through you, Mayor Cole. That's a good question.
Happy for you to take it on
Can I
notice.
just say, they currently have an arrangement with the property where the easement will eventually go. I believe they've had an arrangement in place where the cars have been accessing Vincent Street through a temporary easement, but I would have assumed that that would continue because I understand the plan is to get this done quickly, but perhaps we could just clarify that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if this is approved, the developers certainly want to have this, predominantly this work finished by March, April next year, well in advance of the opening of the building. So there'll still be the ability of the affected landowners to use the temporary access via 295 Vincent Street. And as I said, I think last time we discussed this, the only time in future it will become more problematic is if and when the developer of that site builds, there'll be a temporary loss of access through there, and any private vehicle will have to come out via Oxford Street, and it's only suitable for small vehicles.
So can I just clarify that the Hesperia, who's listed as the potential partner, their access over 295 Vincent Street is only under a licence agreement, which I assume will come to an end, and they'll have so that their ability to guarantee access via that property only exists for the length of time they're building and using it as a set down area. At that conclusion, the owner of that property, the city will need to take on that responsibility in terms of the easement that's provided over that land. Is that correct? That can't be guaranteed under this arrangement because their access to that property is only through a third party.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, it expires on June 30 next year when they finish and occupy the building, in which case we can then, as in the city, insist on the property owner provide access. But as I said, if and when he chooses to build on that site, there will be a period when it's unavailable.
Through you, Mayor Cole, sorry, can I just clarify something? It is actually a public access easement, and when the property was transferred, it becomes a public access easement from then. So the public at large have a right to use that, but it doesn't stipulate what condition the easement is in. So it's not like it has to be maintained to a certain level at this time, but the public do have general right of access through that portion of the lot currently.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just a question in relation to the wording of item 1.3. Is the I note that 1.2 is noting and that 1.3 is authorising the CEO to negotiate. Is 1.3 intended to be that we authorise the CEO office to negotiate, but essentially the maximum that could be negotiated would be what is listed in item 1.2? Or is the intention that there could be some negotiation over things like minor miscellaneous infrastructure, et cetera, that could up the city's contribution from alternate funding sources without having to come back to council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, Hesperia hasn't agreed to this. I sent them, in fact, I have heard nothing from them until today. And I sent them a copy of the draft report and got a rather short or brief email, not seeking any particular clarification, but I obviously will update them tomorrow as a result of this briefing. But in answer to your question, I would have foreseen that there'll be minor things that we may want to do or agree to with the applicant that will incur a greater or additional cost for the city over and above the 155,000.
And where would the funding for that be coming from, and what would be given up as a result of it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we do have some discretionary spending in some of our normal budgets in respect of drainage, streetscape improvements. If it was deemed not to be excessive or extensive, then we would look to do that. But obviously, if it's anything major, we would come back to council and seek approval.
Just foreshadow an amendment on wording, probably.
Can I just also further to that, I think the issue is that the way I've read report, and please just sort of seeking clarification on this, is that you've itemised the elements that the city would be responsible for if we were undertaking the works, and it does include the catenary lighting, and that is 155,000, and that there were elements within the costing provided by Hesperia that we would not necessarily ordinarily entertain, such as parking reimbursements and security and name marketing for nameway laning, which we're going to run in-house, etc. So that we've kind of operated on this basis. It's the 50-50 principle, but in effect, this figure of 155,000 is what it would cost if we were doing those three core elements within the public realm. So would it not therefore be safe to set that as the limit, given that there was an offer of 50-50?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe Hesperia still have an expectation that we'll come up to 186. But as I said, I've had no correspondence in respect to that. So I've had to make some assumptions when I wrote this report that we would fund what we're responsible for into the future. And then anything else over and above that was to enhance their developments. So I would have seen personally this was the maximum that we would contribute.
Okay, well, if it's a maximum, perhaps I'll wait to see what Councillor Gontaszewski brings forward. Okay, all right.
Through you, Nicole, if I can add to that as well, I think perhaps the manager can confirm this. It is the elements that we would fund, but to a higher standard than we would normally necessarily install. So let's reflect that as well.
Any further questions? Councillor Wallace?
Thanks, Michael. I think we've still got $50,000 in there for artwork. Can we just get a comment around, I guess, the priority for funding public art around Vincent at the moment, and whether, provision of $50,000 for a piece of artwork here now is actually kind of at the top of our priority list for arts funding?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll obviously have to take that on notice because I'll talk to the policy in place team, but I've tried to exclude anything like that from my realm that I thought wasn't hard infrastructure that we'd be responsible for.
Okay.
One more, sorry. Can we get a breakdown similar to the table that they provided of your proposed costs as well?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can do that, but they haven't amended theirs. That was therein lies part of the problem.
Okay, shall we move on? Next item is late report tender RFT IE 99-2020 Beatty Park Leisure Centre indoor pool filter plant replacement and outdoor pool and dive pool works, appointment of successful tenderer.
I just wanted to clarify this one was confidential because it did appear to have some confidential information in the report.
Yes, Nicole, there should be a confidential attachment which details the results of the tender. Obviously, some of the information is public as normal, but there should be a confidential attachment.
So at least the version I got on Docs on Tap contained financial data in it. So I'm not sure if that was intended, but the note did say that it was a confidential item. I've got questions about that, so I'll flag that if we could bring that one back at the end, but as well. But they did seem to have information in there that typically in the main report that typically would be in a confidential attachment.
Okay, let's play that safe then, shall we? Okay, any other questions on the tender? Oh, apologies, Councillor Smith, did you have any questions on the tender for the Beatty Park Leisure Centre indoor pool filter replacement, etc.? Etc. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. This question really applies to all three of the tenders that are up tonight. I guess I have a hard time evaluating the tenders without a copy of the RFT document and potentially a copy of the response provided by the tenderer. Is it possible to get the request for tender document and the awarded and the response by the tenderer as attachments to tenders of this size in the future?
Through your call, we wouldn't normally do that. That's a lot of information. The tenderers submit huge amounts of information. You can see there's a lot of tenders. We wouldn't normally share that with council. That's a matter for the panel to sit and wade through all the information provided, summarise it and come to a conclusion. The RFT is summarised in the cover report, but there is more information. I think we can share that. That's not a problem because that was a public document anyway. So.
Yeah, I understand that. I wouldn't be wanting to review their insurance documents and things like that. Like there's definitely parts of the tender responses that could be excluded from attaching here, but I still do think it would be worthwhile if we're being asked to, I guess, approve the comments on the tenders that have been put forward by administration, that we have the opportunity to review some of these documents ourselves.
Well, through you, McCall, I have to take advice on that. We wouldn't normally do that. That's all, as I said, it's a lot of information, and we wouldn't normally share that. That is for the tender evaluation panel, and they summarise their deliberations in the report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to comment on that, we're not asking council to form a judgment on the comments of the panel that have been provided in the report. The report's to provide council an opportunity to approve, confirm that there's been a proper procurement process followed, and that the procurement process accords with our normal requirements under the Act.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say I'd have a hard time establishing whether the procurement processes have been followed without being able to review the primary documents that the tender evaluation has been based on.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'd just like to distinguish between the role of the tender panel and the role of council to approve that a proper and thorough procurement process has been carried out. There's the two different roles.
Thanks, I'll think about it.
Councillors, okay. Next tender 6.8, late report tender RFT IE 103 of 2020, Beatty Park Indoor Leisure Centre 25 metre and leisure pool retiling, appointment of successful tenderer. No questions on this one? Okay, then we're moving to community and business services items. First of all, we have 7.1 draft annual report 2019-20. Questions? 7.2 surrender of North Perth Playgroup lease 15 Haynes Street, North Perth. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Happy for this to be in briefing notes. I'm just wondering about the implications of this for the timeline for the implementation of our development plan for the reserve.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe it aligns with the timeframe, and potentially it's actually means the playgroup will be moving out earlier than any works are expected. So maybe the works proposed can be brought forward, but we can provide some more details in the briefing notes.
Could we also just get a little bit more information about how many groups are still functioning within the North Perth Playgroup, and what the likelihood is that we can help them transfer? Like what sort of numbers we might be able to seek to support to transfer? I know that there's been discussion between one of the Japanese playgroups that meets at North Perth Common to move to Highgate. So just be interested to know in numbers in terms of playgroup memberships going over to our other playgroup centres.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions on the playgroup item? Okay. Item 7.3, advertising of amendment to community funding policy, student citizenship awards. No questions? Okay. 7.4, review of library collection management policy and local history collection management policy, merging the two together. Any questions? Okay, we've dealt with 7.5, so we move to 7.6, authorisation for expenditure for the period 1st to 31st October. No questions. 7.7, investment report as at 31st of October. No questions. 7.8, financial statements as at 31st October 2020. Okay. That takes us to Chief Executive Officer items. So 8.1, council briefing and ordinary meeting of council dates for 2021. This is coming back to us because we had a slight issue with dates, council meeting dates over an election period. Any questions? No. Okay. 8.2, outcome of advertising and adoption of new policy, policy development and review policy. Questions on this item? I have to admit, I haven't had a chance to read this yet. Did we actually get any submissions?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we got one submission from Dudley Meyer.
Okay, thank you. I'll read that during the week. Any other questions? Okay. Item 8.3, late report and minutes of the audit committee meeting held on the 1st of December 2020. Any questions? Okay. And 8.4, information bulletin. Okay, we'll move through those quite quickly. All right, so that means that we still have confidential...
8.5 recess period?
Yes. Oh, that's not on my agenda. Sorry, it's not on my printed agenda. Oh yes, delegated authority to the Chief Executive Officer. That's really weird that that's not on my agenda because it's 8.4, which I have as information bulletin. Okay. Are there any questions in relation to this item? Just clarifying it's the standard delegation.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, but with the provision, we're not expecting to conduct any major tenders during this period. So we're not expecting to receive and assess and therefore needing to determine any major tenders over $250,000 during this period. So it really would be an exceptional circumstance, which we can't foresee at this stage.
But it does extend beyond tenders. Are there any other major matters of that are foreseen during this period?
Through Mayor Cole, none that are foreseen.
Okay.
So, same question I ask pretty much every year these days. So my understanding is the way that the recommendation is worded that any individual elected member that wishes to call in something means it will then be reported to council. Does that then give that elected member the right to decide whether a development application that is being reported to council, for example, because it's received X number of objections, may well go into a deemed refusal period over the 90 days? Because so it gives one elected member the potential to potentially trip council into that position. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, that could be a scenario.
And can I just ask whether administration has a view on whether the call-in power should be extended beyond one elected member, such that they would have to take responsibility to convince perhaps two others, so at least you had 3 elected members to be able to call something in?
Will they be contactable in a short period of time is more the issue rather than...
That's kind of subjective. My question is whether administration is comfortable that an individual elected member has the power to decide that something will potentially not be heard for a number of weeks at their own discretion.
Through Mayor Cole, the way we've drafted the report, that would be a matter for council to decide. This would be an exceptional circumstance. If there was a unforeseen urgent matter, we'd be bringing that to council's attention as soon as possible, and make best endeavours to contact elected members wherever they may be within the country. And I'd need to provide the reasons why it was considered urgent to be determined and why it couldn't wait until the recess period was over.
Okay. Item 9, motions which previous notice have been given, there are nil. Representation on committees and public bodies, nil. So that takes us to confidential item 11.1, late report Mindarie Regional Council strategy and future options. So this being a confidential item, we will have to move behind closed doors.